The galaxy's strongest empires gathered in the massive chamber of the Grand Council, a place where decisions that shaped countless star systems were made, and on that day their attention was fixed on one single subject, Earth, the quiet blue world that had refused to take part in their grand games. Their leaders sat in their towering seats of crystal and steel, their eyes glowing with the pride of species that had ruled for thousands of years. They spoke with arrogance, their words carrying laughter and mockery, for them Earth was nothing more than a curious planet with no voice, no strength, no history of war in the galactic records. Some whispered that humans were too timid, too fragile to stand among the great. Others suggested that perhaps Earth was hiding behind silence because it feared the truth of its own weakness, and the laughter grew louder as each empire added its insult. For years the Council had sent messages to Earth, some polite and others demanding, asking them to join alliances, to swear loyalty, or at least to explain their silence. But no response had ever come. The humans had chosen not to answer, not to send representatives, not to show their fleets, and this quietness was now seen as cowardice by those who believed power was measured only in noise and weapons. The proud rulers mocked Earth openly, their voices echoing through the chamber as if the planet were already judged and sentenced. A small empire leader even dared to call Earth a ghost, a world that pretended to exist but offered nothing, and the room filled with cruel laughter. Yet in the shadows of the galaxy, a silent warning had already begun to move, one that none of them cared to notice, for the great powers were too busy drowning in their pride. Subtle signals slipped across the edges of space, faint traces that brushed against scanners only to vanish again. Strange disruptions touched the corners of trade routes. Whispers passed between ships of sudden malfunctions, unexplained moments when engines slowed or screens flickered. But the Council dismissed these as accidents. Their pride would not let them see a pattern. Their arrogance told them nothing dangerous could come from Earth. And so they ignored it. They ignored the silence that was no longer emptiness but a presence. As the Council continued to laugh, there were still a few who shifted nervously in their seats. Though their voices were softer than the thunder of the majority, one elder spoke carefully, reminding the Council of ancient stories, stories that warned never to misjudge those who stayed quiet. But his words were drowned out. No one wished to hear wisdom when pride gave them sweeter comfort. Another leader asked why Earth's silence had lasted so long. If they were weak, why not beg for protection? If they were timid, why not seek a shield? The questions floated in the chamber like sparks, but they faded under the mocking laughter of those who had already decided Earth was nothing. The Council's arrogance grew as they voted on their next steps. They declared that Earth had no place among the stars, that silence was disrespect, that the humans were to be treated as a species unworthy of respect or caution. Fleets would be sent to remind them of their place. Soldiers would be stationed near their borders. Trade routes would be closed to them. The decision was made with prideful certainty, and the sound of approval shook the chamber like thunder. They believed they had silenced Earth forever, without ever hearing its voice. But beyond the chamber, far from the glow of council halls and proud speeches, the stars themselves carried a different truth. Deep in the black sea of space, hidden machines watched. Cloaked vessels drifted in perfect stillness, waiting, listening, measuring. Earth's silence was not weakness but calculation. Every insult spoken in the Council reached human ears through unseen channels. Every proud word was recorded, every threat was weighed. And though the galaxy mocked Earth for being voiceless, they did not understand that silence was its own language, a warning louder than any shout. In the hearts of those few who sensed unease, a cold thought remained. Perhaps silence was not fear, perhaps silence was power, and as the meeting ended, as the strongest empires celebrated their decision, they did not realize they had just stepped closer to the very thing they feared most. For Earth had never been absent. It had only been waiting, waiting in silence, waiting until the moment came when the galaxy's pride would shatter. The council chamber emptied, the rulers proud, their soldiers ready, and the empires certain of their strength. But in the dark corners of space, the silent warning drifted further, reaching, spreading, a quiet tide that none could stop, and though the galaxy laughed that day, the silence was already speaking, and soon, they would understand what it truly meant. The decision of the council spread quickly across the galaxy, carried in transmissions and broadcasts, celebrated by those who believed themselves untouchable. Fleets moved into preparation, generals trained their soldiers, and pride filled every word spoken in the great halls of the empires. The order was clear. Earth's silence had lasted too long, and now it would be punished. Some saw it as a small matter, Others saw it as an easy victory to prove their power. They believed humans had nothing to defend themselves with, no fleets to match their own, no armies to resist their strength, and the laughter that had begun in the council chamber now echoed through the stars. The proud rulers promised their people that Earth would fall without a fight. Ships gathered at border points near Earth's system, their hulls gleaming, their engines burning with confidence. Commanders spoke in loud voices about how quickly they would break through, how easily they would force humans to bow. They told stories of past victories, of enemies who had surrendered within days, and they laughed that Earth would not last even one. Their arrogance blinded them. They measured strength only in numbers and firepower, not in silence, not in patience, and not in what they could not see. But even as they prepared, unease began to stir in quiet corners. A few officers who had studied Earth more carefully spoke of strange reports, records of human endurance on their own world, of storms and disasters survived, of wars fought with a fury that shook their own kind. Whispers told of human history filled with battles where the weaker side rose from the ashes stronger than before. These officers spoke carefully, warning their leaders not to underestimate a world that had remained silent for so long. But their voices were ignored, their warnings dismissed as weakness. No one in power wanted to hear doubts when victory already seemed certain. The fleets moved closer, thousands of ships forming a wall of steel and firepower. They crossed sectors with banners raised, their signals loud, announcing their approach, and they believed Earth would tremble at the sound. Yet something strange happened along the way. Navigation systems flickered without reason. Some vessels lost contact for moments. Others reported strange static across their communication channels. A few even claimed to have seen shadows in the void, vast shapes that vanished before sensors could lock onto them. The commanders laughed at these stories, calling them illusions born of fear. But deep inside, soldiers began to whisper among themselves, and the silence of Earth weighed heavier than any noise. In the council halls, prideful speeches continued. Leaders told their people that victory was near, that humans would kneel, that Earth would finally learn its place. Yet among the citizens of smaller empires, fear began to grow. Many remembered the silence differently. They wondered why a species would ignore threats, why a world would never answer even when mocked. Some began to suspect that the silence itself was the warning, and that the galaxy had mistaken it for weakness. But those doubts were never spoken loudly, for fear of being crushed by the pride of their rulers. The Armada pushed forward until the edge of Earth's territory came into view. Vast scanners swept the system, searching for fleets, for defenses, for signs of fear or surrender. But the screens showed only calm stars and quiet planets. No fleets gathered, no armies waiting. The humans seemed absent, and this emptiness only fueled the arrogance of the commanders. They shouted their victory before it began, convinced that silence meant surrender. Yet among the lowest ranks, unease grew stronger. For every soldier could feel something pressing in the back of their mind, like an unseen gaze watching them from the shadows of space. Night after night on their journey, soldiers whispered of dreams, strange visions of Earth's oceans, Earth's storms, Earth's endless forests. They dreamed of a world alive in ways they had never seen, and they woke with a heavy fear they could not explain. Some begged to turn back, others kept their silence out of loyalty. But the commanders ignored it all, for they could only see victory, not the truth, not the weight of silence that hung over them like a storm ready to break. And while the fleets pressed on, while the galaxy celebrated, Earth itself remained quiet. No broadcasts, no fleets sent to meet them, only silence. But in the silence there was movement unseen. Cloaked ships drifting at the edges, signals too faint for scanners, eyes watching every move the Armada made, every mistake, every boast. Earth measured it all, weighed it all, and still said nothing, for silence was their greatest weapon, and the galaxy had not yet understood what it meant. By the time the fleets reached the border of Earth's system, the pride of the galaxy was burning brighter than ever, but beneath it, fear was spreading like a hidden flame, and though the commanders would not admit it, even they felt the weight of silence pressing on them. Earth's voice had not been heard, but its presence was everywhere, and soon, the galaxy would learn that silence was not absence, but power waiting to be unleashed. The fleets stood at the border of Earth's system, their ships, gleaming like blades under distant suns, their weapons charged and ready, their commanders speaking with overconfidence. The galaxy's strongest were certain that the silence of Earth would soon be broken. Yet as their scanners spread across the black sea of space, something strange began to happen. Signals wavered, systems glitched, Engines slowed for no reason. The calm stars around them seemed to bend with faint ripples, and every technician on every ship stared at their screens with confusion. The first sign had appeared, though no one wished to admit it. One battleship in the forward line suddenly lost power. Its lights flickered and its massive engines went dark. Soldiers rushed through the corridors as alarms screamed. The commander shouted orders to restart the systems. But nothing responded. The great vessel drifted silently, helpless, and then without warning the systems blinked back to life as if nothing had happened. No trace of malfunction remained. Engineers searched desperately, but their scans found no reason, no damage, nothing to explain what they had just seen. Whispers spread among the crew. Some called it sabotage. Others feared something unseen had touched their ship. But the higher officers dismissed it as simple error, ordering silence, telling the crew that fear was weakness. But the malfunctions did not stop. Across the fleet similar events began to occur. A cruiser's targeting system locked onto its own ally for a few seconds before resetting. A scout ship's navigation spun in circles until it nearly collided with an asteroid. Smaller vessels reported their communication screens filling with static that pulsed like a heartbeat, and on every ship, the crews felt it. The sense of being watched, not by sensors, not by machines, but by something alive, something vast, something patient. Yet when they reported it, their leaders laughed and mocked them. They called it nerves, the stress of war, and reminded them of the weakness of Earth. But the soldiers were no longer certain. Meanwhile, traders and travelers across nearby sectors began speaking of odd events. Caravans passing near Earth's borders reported sudden power losses, their ships floating dead for minutes before roaring back to life. Others spoke of faint shadows drifting through the void, shadows larger than any fleet, so massive that scanners refused to read them. And though none of these reports reached the official council records, the rumors spread quickly, carried by frightened voices, and in secret corners of the galaxy, fear began to rise, the kind of fear that no amount of pride could silence. As the fleets pressed deeper, the commanders grew impatient. They wanted proof of Earth's weakness. They wanted to see humans crawl before them. They pushed their soldiers harder, ordered their ships closer. But the silence never broke. The humans did not answer, did not fight, did not appear. Only the strange disruptions followed the armada wherever it went. One night, on a carrier drifting in the dark, soldiers in their bunks awoke to the sound of their own communication channels opening by themselves. A faint static filled the air, and beneath the static a voice whispered just 3 words. Words no one could trace. Words that chilled every heart aboard. "We are here." And then the silence returned. The commanders tried to hide this. They threatened their crews, told them it was lies, tricks, imagination. But soldiers talk, and soon across the fleets every soldier had heard of the whisper. Some even swore they had heard it in their dreams. The fear spread faster than the commanders could control, for silence had turned into presence, a presence they could not explain, and though they still mocked Earth in their councils, they began to look nervously at the empty black around them, wondering what hid beyond their eyes. On the homeworlds of the great empires, the people who watched the council's broadcasts began to notice the change. The proud words of victory seemed thinner, the confident speeches shorter, and in the voices of some leaders there was a tremor that had not been there before. Questions began to rise among the citizens. What if Earth was not weak? What if Earth was not hiding? What if the silence was a mask covering something the galaxy had never faced before? But the rulers silenced these questions, drowning them with promises of quick victory, though even they no longer believed their own words completely. By the time the armada reached the first planet near Earth's sun, the unease had grown into fear that no one could deny. The stars themselves seemed wrong. Scanners showed readings that made no sense. Ships detected signals of fleets that were not there. Some claimed to see massive shadows moving between planets, while others insisted nothing was present. Reality itself seemed to bend in ways no one understood, and still Earth said nothing, not a single broadcast, not a single fleet revealed itself, only silence. A silence that pressed harder and harder until even the proudest commanders struggled to breathe beneath it. And then, at the edge of the system, as the fleets regrouped and prepared to advance further, every screen across every ship flickered at the same time. The symbols of their empires vanished from their displays, and for 3 long seconds only one image appeared, a blue planet turning slowly in the dark, Earth, no words, no threats, only the image, and then it was gone, leaving the fleets in silence so deep it felt like death. Commanders shouted, technicians worked, Soldiers prayed. But the truth could not be denied anymore. Earth had spoken, not with noise, not with war, but with silence that reached deeper than any weapon, and the galaxy's strongest began to understand that something far greater was waiting for them. The fleets floated deeper into the system. Thousands of warships spread like a net across the stars, their weapons glowing and ready, their commanders standing tall with forced confidence, but beneath the surface of their pride, unease crept through every rank. The soldiers felt it most, their eyes darting to the empty dark, their ears catching sounds that should not exist in the vacuum of space. Silence pressed against them like a living force, and the longer they waited for Earth to answer, the heavier that silence became. It was no longer absence, it was a presence, a weight, a warning. At first the commanders barked orders to push forward, to scan again, to ready weapons. They wanted to prove their control, to remind their soldiers that fear was weakness. But even they could not hide the tremor in their voices. For each scan showed nothing, no fleets, no defenses, only emptiness. Yet the emptiness was not peaceful, it was suffocating, as if every star hid something watching, something vast, something patient. Some ships reported ghost signals, massive readings that appeared and vanished in seconds, shapes too large to measure, shadows moving between planets. But no proof, nothing that could be captured, only fear. On one battleship, the crew sat frozen as their sensors locked onto a reading, a vessel larger than anything recorded in galactic history. But within moments the signal vanished. The screens returned to calm stars. The captain told the crew it was error, told them not to spread lies. But his shaking hands betrayed him. Soldiers whispered of the shadow, of what it might be, and the rumor spread like fire across the fleets. Earth had ships, but ships that did not fight, ships that only watched. Ships that the galaxy's strongest could not even see until they wished to be seen. Nights on the ships grew longer. Soldiers dreamed of oceans rising to swallow them, forests stretching endlessly, storms tearing their fleets apart. They dreamed of Earth, though most had never seen it. They woke with sweat on their skin and fear in their hearts. Some began to refuse orders, claiming they were cursed, others begged to retreat. But the commanders silenced them, some with threats, others with executions. Yet even killing fear did not erase it, for silence always returned, heavier, stronger, impossible to escape. The council leaders, safe on their distant thrones, demanded progress. They sent messages filled with anger, asking why Earth had not yet been conquered. The commanders answered with prideful lies. They claimed humans were too weak to resist, that soon the fleets would crush them. But their eyes betrayed their words. They knew something was wrong, something beyond their understanding. But pride chained them to their path, and pride would not let them turn back. As the armada advanced toward the heart of Earth's system, their sensors caught faint transmissions, whispers so quiet they seemed like echoes. No language could be decoded, only tones, rising and falling, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Some ships ignored it, others recorded it. But no one could explain it. The whispers came from everywhere and nowhere, from empty space, from planets with no life, from the very void itself. And some soldiers began to believe that Earth was not answering with words, but with the voice of the universe itself. The fear reached its breaking point when a patrol of 10 ships vanished, sent ahead to scout the nearest planet. Their signals flickered once and then were gone. No explosion, no debris, no cries for help, only silence. When the commanders demanded reports, the scanners showed nothing. The patrol had simply ceased to exist. And for the first time the commanders stopped shouting, their voices lowered, their eyes restless. For even they could no longer deny that something was wrong, something far beyond them, and still Earth remained silent. On one flagship, an officer dared to speak aloud what others feared. He said the silence was not weakness, it was power. That Earth's silence was not the absence of voice but the presence of control. The commander struck him down before the crew, calling him a traitor. But the words had already settled in their hearts, and many began to believe it, though none dared to speak it again. The fear was too strong, and silence held them in its grip. As the fleets prepared to press closer, their formations broke, ships drifting further apart, discipline weakening. Some captains deliberately slowed their vessels. Others faked malfunctions to avoid moving forward. Courage was slipping away. Pride was cracking. The galaxy's strongest warriors, who had crushed worlds before, now trembled in the face of a planet that had not fired a single shot. Earth's silence had risen higher than their arrogance, and it was shattering them piece by piece. The final moment of that night came when every fleet received a transmission at the same time. Every screen flickered, every signal froze, and for 5 long seconds the same image returned, Earth, blue and silent, turning slowly in the void. But this time the planet's oceans glowed faintly as if alive, and the heartbeat-like sound filled every chamber, every hall, every mind, and then it ended, leaving them in a silence deeper than death. Commanders stared at one another without words. Soldiers gripped their weapons as if they could fight the emptiness itself, and the galaxy's strongest finally felt the weight of their mistake. Earth had not ignored them. Earth had been warning them, and now the warning was growing louder without a single word spoken. The fleets formed their lines with cold determination, thousands of ships stretching across the edge of the solar system, weapons glowing, engines roaring, commanders barking orders as if noise alone could push back the silence that surrounded them. The galaxy's strongest were restless, fear whispered through their soldiers, but pride forced their leaders forward. They would attack. They would finally break the quiet planet that had haunted their dreams. And they believed that once Earth bled, the silence would vanish, so they gave the order to fire. A wave of energy surged through the void, weapons lit the blackness with fire brighter than suns, missiles streaked forward like falling stars, beams of pure destruction tore across the system, aimed at planets and moons, aimed at empty space, aimed at shadows they could not see. The fleets unleashed their fury in a storm of light. But when the brilliance faded, nothing had changed. No explosions tore planets apart, no debris floated through the void. The weapons had vanished as if swallowed by the darkness. The commanders shouted in confusion, demanded scans, demanded answers. But the screens showed only silence. The targets were untouched, the void unchanged, and the galaxy's strongest had just seen their power disappear into nothing. Before they could recover, the silence answered, not with sound, not with threats, but with action. One battleship at the center of the fleet froze, its engines locked, its lights dying, its weapons falling silent, and then another followed, then another, whole squadrons trapped in stillness, drifting powerless, as if invisible hands had reached out and seized them. Soldiers screamed, officers slammed controls, but nothing responded. Their ships had become coffins in the void, and no one could explain how. Panic spread, fear filled the comm channels, and the commanders shouted for discipline. But their words were hollow. They too felt the weight of the unseen grip that had turned their might into nothing. On one flagship, the crew watched in horror as the viewscreens showed an entire armada of enemy ships appear for a heartbeat, vast and dark, their outlines larger than cities, their surfaces cloaked in silence, and then they vanished again, leaving only empty stars. The soldiers gasped, their hands trembling. Some fell to their knees in despair, for they knew what they had seen could not be denied. Earth's fleets were real. They were there, hidden in the silence, watching, controlling, waiting. The commanders insisted it was a trick, a glitch, a lie, but their own eyes betrayed them. The truth was too heavy to ignore. The silence was no longer absence. It was power greater than anything the galaxy had ever faced. Desperation drove the commanders to rally their fleets. They ordered fresh attacks, demanded more fire, and once again weapons roared, missiles screamed, beams tore through the black. But the void swallowed them whole. Not a single blast reached its mark. The soldiers felt despair as if the universe itself refused to let them fight. And then Earth's silence deepened. Systems across the fleets shut down one by one, engines, shields, life support. Entire ships falling into stillness as though the void itself commanded them to stop. The commanders screamed for retreat. But their voices were drowned out by the sound of silence pressing into their hearts, louder than any weapon, more final than any command. For the first time in history, the galaxy's strongest warriors felt powerless, their pride broken, their arrogance shattered. They had entered the system as conquerors, but now they were prey in a trap they could not see. Some ships attempted to flee, their engines flaring, but as they turned, their systems flickered and died, leaving them floating helplessly in the void. Others tried to fire again, but their weapons refused to answer, and soldiers wept in despair, their courage stolen by the weight of silence. And then came the final moment, when across every ship, every hall, every chamber, the lights dimmed, the screens flickered, and for a single breathless instant, silence became sight. The image of Earth appeared once more, the blue planet glowing softly, its oceans shining, its storms moving in endless patterns, and beneath it all came the steady pulse of a heartbeat, deep, slow, unshakable. The sound filled their ships, their minds, their souls. And they understood at last, Earth had never been weak, Earth had never been afraid, Earth had only been waiting, watching, and warning in silence. The fleets hung broken in the void, their weapons useless, their engines cold, their pride shattered, and the galaxy's strongest warriors realized too late that they were not the hunters but the hunted, and that the silence they had mocked was the greatest warning they had ever been given. They could not fight it, they could not escape it, and in that endless silence they felt the truth press down upon them. Earth's patience was over, and what came next would change the galaxy forever. Across the broken fleets silence ruled, ships drifted powerless, their once proud lights dimmed, their weapons silent, their soldiers sitting in cold fear. Commanders whispered to each other, their arrogance shattered, their voices now trembling where once they thundered with pride. They had believed Earth to be weak, a planet too timid to raise its voice, but now they had seen the truth with their own eyes. They had seen weapons vanish into nothing. They had seen ships freeze in the void without a single blast fired against them, and worst of all, they had heard the silence, not emptiness, but a presence that pressed into their hearts like a great weight. And though they tried to deny it, though they tried to cling to the scraps of pride left in their hands, they knew they were broken. Word of the disaster did not remain trapped in the fleet. Across the galaxy whispers began to spread. The first recordings appeared in hidden channels, fragments captured by desperate soldiers before their ships had gone dark. One clip showed missiles streaking toward Earth's system only to vanish into the black, swallowed without trace. Another showed a massive battleship frozen in stillness while its crew screamed in confusion, and another, the most terrifying, showed the flicker of a shadow. A vessel so large that its outline filled the entire screen. A vessel that vanished before sensors could register it. These recordings were passed in secret from soldier to soldier, from citizen to citizen, until they reached even the smallest colonies, and fear began to grow like wildfire. In the grand halls of the empires, the council tried to control the flow of truth. They labeled the recordings as fakes, tricks designed to weaken morale. They told their citizens that Earth had nothing, that the fleets were winning, that soon victory would come. But the people had seen the terror in the soldiers' eyes. They had heard the silence in the background of the recordings. Silence that felt alive, silence that reached even through their screens. And they no longer believed the lies. Riots broke out in small colonies. Families cried out for their leaders to end the war before the silence reached them too. The proud empires that once ruled with fear now trembled under the weight of their people's doubt. Meanwhile, the fleets still trapped in Earth's system tried to send messages back to their homes, desperate pleas for help, for understanding, for forgiveness. But most of their signals never arrived, cut off mid-transmission, lost in the void, as if the silence itself swallowed their cries. Some few made it through, broken fragments filled with static, commanders begging the council to retreat, officers warning that they had made a mistake, and soldiers weeping that they had seen the face of power greater than anything the galaxy had ever known. These fragments reached the council, but instead of responding with wisdom, the leaders drowned in their fear and pride. They silenced the messages, buried them beneath propaganda, and ordered their people to trust in strength, though their own hearts shook. Yet even among the leaders there were cracks. Some sat in their chambers at night replaying the recordings in secret, their eyes fixed on the image of Earth turning slowly in the dark, that faint blue glow haunting them, the sound of the heartbeat echoing in their ears, and they realized the truth they could not admit aloud. Earth had never been silent. Earth had been speaking all along, speaking in the language of patience, in the language of power held back. And now that patience was ending. On distant worlds where ordinary people lived, fear grew heavier each day. Children woke screaming from dreams of oceans swallowing stars, of forests stretching across planets, of storms that broke fleets apart with a whisper. Miners in asteroid belts swore they saw shadows pass across their skies, larger than worlds, and traders who ventured near Earth's borders returned pale and shaken, their voices trembling as they spoke of power surging through the void, power that bent their ships without touching them. The galaxy's people no longer mocked Earth. They no longer saw silence as weakness. They saw it as the greatest weapon ever carried by any species. And they asked themselves the question their leaders refused to answer. What happens when Earth finally chooses to break its silence? Back in the crippled fleet, soldiers recorded their own words in secret. Some left final messages for families they believed they would never see again. Others cursed their leaders for leading them into a war they could not win. But most simply sat in quiet terror, staring at the stars, waiting for the next moment when the silence would act. Some swore they could feel the presence watching them, not from one direction, but from everywhere, above, below, behind, as though the very universe had eyes, and those eyes were fixed on them. One soldier whispered to his comrade that the silence was not Earth's voice but Earth's judgment, and the comrade had no strength left to disagree. The truth began to spread faster than the council could control it. The recordings leaked wider, reaching neutral empires, reaching rebel colonies, reaching even those who had never heard of Earth before, and everywhere the reaction was the same, disbelief turning to fear, fear turning to silence, silence that matched the very warning humans had given. The galaxy's pride was shattering, piece by piece, under the weight of a planet that had not spoken a single word. Earth had revealed itself not through speeches or boasts but through stillness, through patience, through power that bent reality itself. And the galaxy could no longer pretend. By the time the sixth night fell across the fleet still trapped near Earth, no one mocked anymore, no one laughed. The commanders did not bark orders. The soldiers did not boast of victory. Instead there was only waiting, waiting for Earth to speak again, waiting for the silence to strike, waiting for the truth they now knew could not be stopped. And in that endless waiting, every heart across the galaxy whispered the same thought. The humans had been polite. They had given warnings. They had allowed the galaxy to live in ignorance, but now that patience was over, and when the silence finally broke, nothing would remain the same. The Grand Council chamber, once filled with the booming voices of rulers who mocked Earth, now echoed with silence broken only by whispers of fear. The same leaders who had laughed at the humans now sat restless on their thrones of crystal and steel, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. The recordings from the fleets could no longer be hidden, no matter how many they tried to bury. Every corner of the galaxy had seen them. Every citizen had felt the weight of Earth's silence pressing through the screens. And the leaders who had declared Earth weak now found themselves prisoners of their own lies, their pride crumbling in front of them. Arguments erupted in the chamber. One ruler slammed his fist against the table, demanding more fleets, demanding more firepower, claiming that Earth's silence was nothing more than technology that could be broken. But his voice shook with each word, and the others saw it. Another ruler shouted that they should retreat, that they should beg for peace before it was too late. But he was drowned out by those who still clung to arrogance, yet even their voices carried no weight. Their people no longer believed in them. Their soldiers no longer trusted their orders. Pride had turned to panic, and panic to desperation. Outside the council, chaos spread across the empires. Riots shook the streets. Families screamed at their rulers for sending children to die in a war they could never win. Soldiers deserted their posts, throwing away their weapons. Colonies declared independence, refusing to fight a planet that had not even raised its voice. The galaxy was unraveling, not from Earth's fleets, not from Earth's weapons, but from Earth's silence. A silence that had pierced deeper than any blade. A silence that had shattered the galaxy's strongest without a single shot. Reports continued to flow into the chamber, though the leaders dreaded hearing them. Another squadron lost, their signals cut, their ships floating powerless, no survivors, another fleet begging to retreat. Their commanders breaking down in tears as they confessed they could not face the silence any longer. Whispers from neutral empires saying they would not aid the council, that they would not risk drawing Earth's gaze upon themselves. And then the most terrifying report of all, entire planets near the borders claimed they could feel it, a presence pressing against them. The silence stretching beyond the fleets, beyond the council, spreading like a storm across the galaxy. The leaders tried to hold meetings, tried to argue strategies, but every plan crumbled. One suggested building weapons of greater power, but another snapped that no weapon had ever touched Earth. Another suggested calling allies, but the allies had already withdrawn in fear. Another whispered of retreat, but pride silenced him, for even in panic the rulers feared showing weakness, yet deep inside, all of them knew the truth. There was no strategy, no weapon, no alliance. Earth had already won. And their only choice now was whether they would kneel or be broken. In the private chambers, away from the public eye, some leaders began to draft messages, not of war, not of strength, but of surrender. They argued over the words, too afraid to insult Earth with arrogance, too afraid to show defiance. They debated whether to call it peace or to call it apology. But the truth was clear. They were no longer rulers of the galaxy. They were beggars before a silent judge, and their only hope was that Earth would show mercy. Yet even as they prepared their pleas, Fear whispered in their minds. What if Earth did not forgive? What if Earth's silence had already spoken the final answer? What if the warnings had been ignored for too long and now the time for mercy had ended? Some leaders broke down weeping, their crowns slipping from their heads, their robes torn, their pride gone. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to speak at all, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they had brought this upon themselves. Among the citizens of the galaxy the truth was already accepted. They no longer looked to their rulers, they no longer looked to their fleets. They whispered prayers not to their gods but to Earth. They begged the silent planet to spare them, to look past the arrogance of their leaders. They whispered to the stars as if Earth was listening, for they felt the presence watching. They felt the silence stretching across their skies, and they knew that Earth heard everything. Back in the chamber the council finally broke. The leaders could no longer pretend, no longer lie. Their voices cracked as they voted, not for war, not for pride, but for surrender, and with trembling hands they prepared a single message. A message that would be sent across the stars, to the planet they had mocked, to the people they had called weak. The message carried no arrogance, no pride, only fear, only desperation. Only the plea of empires who had been brought to their knees without a single battle won. We beg for peace. We beg for forgiveness. We beg you to let us live. And as the message was prepared, as it was carried into the void on trembling signals, the council sat in silence, waiting, dreading, wondering if Earth would answer, and if it did, what the answer would be. But in their hearts they already knew the truth. Earth did not need to answer. Earth had already spoken. Its silence had shattered their pride. Its patience had ended, and now the galaxy stood trembling before the truth they had ignored for too long. The message of surrender drifted through the void, carried on trembling. Signals that crossed stars and systems. The council had sent it with broken pride, their voices stripped of arrogance, their crowns feeling heavier than ever before. They had begged for peace, begged for forgiveness, begged for life, and now they waited, their eyes fixed on the silent stars, their hearts pounding with fear, for they knew the truth. They were no longer rulers, no longer masters of empires. They were children before a judge, and the judge had not spoken. Across the galaxy every screen, every transmitter, every listening post waited. Citizens gathered in crowded squares. Soldiers huddled in their barracks. Even the smallest colonies in the farthest corners of the galaxy turned their antennas toward the void. All of them waiting, listening, trembling in silence. They had never waited for anything with such fear, and yet Earth did not answer. Minutes became hours, hours became days. And still there was nothing, no message, no broadcast, no sound. Only the same silence that had haunted them from the beginning. And with each passing moment the silence pressed heavier on their souls. Some began to believe Earth would never answer, that silence was their answer, that humanity had judged them already and found them guilty. Whispers spread that the fleets lost in Earth's system had not been destroyed but taken, swallowed by the silence, erased from existence as if they had never been. Fear turned to despair, despair to madness, riots grew worse, entire planets fell into chaos, leaders were torn from their palaces by angry mobs, soldiers refused to march, and yet still they waited, for deep inside they could not accept it. They could not accept that silence itself was the final word. And then it happened, without warning, across every ship, every world, every screen in the galaxy. The stars themselves seemed to pause, lights flickered, air grew heavy, and for a single moment every living being felt it. A presence pressing against their minds, a weight they could not resist, and then the image appeared, the same image that had haunted the fleets before, Earth, blue and silent, turning slowly in the dark, oceans glowing faintly, storms swirling with power, forests and mountains alive beneath the clouds. But this time the image did not vanish. It remained, steady, unshakable, filling every screen, every hall, every eye. The galaxy froze, no one moved, no one spoke, even the bravest warriors bowed their heads. And then, at last, Earth spoke, not in shouts, not in threats, but in a voice that was quiet, steady, unshakable. The voice of patience that had ended. 3 words carried across the stars. 3 words that shattered the galaxy more than any fleet could have: we were polite. The words echoed in every mind, in every hall, in every heart. And then came the final strike, the words that ended the waiting, until now. The silence that followed was louder than any war. Entire empires collapsed under the weight of those words. Leaders fell to their knees, citizens wept, soldiers dropped their weapons. For they all understood, Earth had never been weak, Earth had never been afraid, Earth had only been merciful, holding back power beyond comprehension, giving the galaxy a chance to choose peace, to respect the silence, and the galaxy had mocked it, had ignored it, had spat on it, and now the patience was gone. Across the council chamber the rulers who once laughed at Earth wept openly, some screamed for mercy, others collapsed in despair. The message of surrender they had sent felt meaningless now, for Earth's answer had already been given, not in promises, not in treaties, but in judgment. The galaxy trembled as their people cried out, praying not to gods but to Earth, begging the humans to spare them. But the humans did not speak again, their voice was silence. Their warning had been delivered, and the galaxy could only wait for what would come. In the fleet still trapped near Earth, soldiers stared at their screens in horror as their ships slowly powered down one by one, not by force, not by fire, but by command beyond their understanding. Lights dimmed, engines died, life support flickered. Some ships simply vanished into the void without a trace. Others floated dead and silent. The soldiers frozen in their seats, unable to move, unable to speak, the silence around them heavier than death. They understood now. Their lives were no longer their own, they belonged to Earth, and Earth could end them at any moment. The galaxy's strongest, once proud and untouchable, had been brought to their knees by a planet they had mocked, by a species they had dismissed, their pride shattered, their power broken, their voices silenced, and as the image of Earth slowly faded from their screens, replaced once more by empty stars, the galaxy trembled in terror. For they knew this was only the beginning. Earth had spoken, Earth had judged, and Earth had promised. They had been polite, but no longer, and now the galaxy would live under the weight of that truth forever. The silence returned, endless, eternal, and yet it was no longer the silence of absence. It was the silence of power, the silence of a warning fulfilled, the silence of humanity watching, waiting, deciding, and the galaxy bowed its head, knowing it could never rise again without Earth's permission. For the truth had been revealed, Earth's silent warning had shattered their pride, and now they finally knew the truth. They had awakened something they could never control.